convict labor from the state convict factory. And that was part of their fight, was they did not want convict labor. They wanted unionized labor at union wages. They wanted integrated labor force. They wanted women workers to also be hired, and they wanted the newly forming worker co-ops, construction co-ops and things to be in the mix, to be hired in the mix. They won the election. They did that, and the Richmond City Hall was built exactly the way the Working Men's Party said. Unionized, integrated labor, including women's work, including worker co-ops that were contracted with. So one example of that connection, right, doing the political work, connecting it with the economic justice and labor rights, right, connecting it with women's rights as well as racial equity rights. And it's a successful and exciting, successful program that happened. And it shows what those kinds of coalitions can do, especially when you add, right, the economic justice piece to it. The second example happens soon, a few years later. The Knights of Labor were actually a huge national labor union that was radical. And so because it was radical during especially the time of the 1880s and the repressive era, they were short-lived because just like the Black Panther Party in the 1970s, right, a COINTELPRO type white supremacist terrorism really kind of dismantled and terrorized that union. It was a very large union, over 1 million people throughout the states, most of the states. As they started to decline and have to go underground and then be broken up, other smaller, similar progressive unions around the South and the US in general came together. And then we had the Colored Farmers Alliance and Cooperative Union. The Blacks decided they needed their own union and co-op development association. It wasn't enough just to be included in some of these progressive integrated white unions. They needed to fight on their own and be their own group. So my second example is the Colored Farmers Alliance and Cooperative Union. Again, a political party, a labor union, and a co-op development association, this time run only by Blacks. Though unfortunately they had to have their president had to be white for them to get standing as a labor union. But all the rest of the members were Black. And by the late 1880s, it was actually the largest Black organization in the United States with over about 1.5 million members. What was their platform? They wanted to organize themselves as a mutual benefit organization to improve the lives of Black farmers and Black farm workers through education and economic cooperation. They were as militant as the Knights of Labor. They pulled boycotts and strikes in order to fight for labor rights. They established buying clubs, equipment sharing co-ops, credit exchanges, and agricultural cooperatives. They what else did they do? They formed. They held national conferences. The first one was in Texas in 1888. By 1891, as I said, they had over 1 million members. Most Black sharecroppers and tenant farmers were members, or that was what most of their membership was. And because of the KKK, they were hounded, terrorized, and operated mostly underground, but they were able to operate at least what they called exchanges, 4 exchanges in Norfolk, Charleston, Mobile, New Orleans, 5 in Houston. These exchanges had co-op stores and warehouses where they could buy in bulk and buy materials and supplies together, share machinery and equipment. And then they also had credit exchanges where they could go to get loans to buy land, loans to buy equipment, loans, right? That was, again, like a credit union, but we didn't have credit unions yet at that period of time. So again, a very successful, probably 10-year organization, but mostly operated underground and was horribly terrorized, so that many of their members were lynched. A lot of their exchanges were burned, and things like that, but they still were able to persist on into the 1890s. So you'll see when you talk more about this chapter later on that these, again, these projects, the thing they have in common are these connections, right? Connections between politics and economics, landowners and farm workers, right? All working together for the same ideas, making sure that labor rights, cooperative education, cooperative economics are being connected to the politics, to the everyday lives of people, and having to work in the atmosphere of these horribly repressive times of the 1880s. So those are my two favorite examples, but you'll see there's other information, other examples in the chapter. I'm excited for you guys to keep talking about the chapter. In a minute, we're going to hear from, as soon as I go, you'll hear from, I think it's Abani and Rashida. But I wanted, before I go, to make sure to give some homework and then to turn it over to Dr. Haynes. Did I see somebody had a question?
No,
Okay.
I said that my name was Albany. That's
all. Oh, I'm sorry. You did have a correction because I massacred your name. I'm so sorry. So thank you. Thanks for letting us know how badly. I think I massacred the other name too, but anyway, you guys.
No, you got it right. It's Rashida.
Oh, I did? Oh my gosh. Okay, great. So we need 2 people to volunteer for next time to do chapter 3. So let's do that now so I can put that in my notes, and then I'll give you your homework and turn it over to Dr. Haynes. Nobody wants to do chapter 3 next time?
Volunteer.
Okay,
Natalie.
Great. Your name, Natalie? Okay. Sorry, my pen isn't working. I got it. Okay, we need one more person. Okay, well, maybe, oh, okay, the Natalie was in the chat. Oh, good. Cassandra, right? Also said she'll do chapter 3. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. I mean, if more people want to do it, that's fine, but I figured at least 2 each time to make sure we have them prepared to do it. That would be wonderful. And my last thing is just to remind you that you're supposed to be thinking, exploring examples of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color co-ops in your area, past or present. That you should be looking at, your own family. There's something that just came out from a woman named Patty Allen in Champaign, Illinois. She just uncovered her family's farming and co-op history and started writing about it. She found out that her family was embarrassed about farming, even though they were doing all this co-op farming, and started a co-op society in Champaign at the turn of the century. But they talked more about their relationship with the university because they were more proud of that. So you might find that, right, some of these family histories, some of this history has been kind of suppressed because people feel like farming, even if it's noble, was beneath them or something. And so some of these early rural co-op stuff maybe got lost in family's history because of that. It might have gotten lost because of all the terrorism against it, and people were trying to protect their families by not telling them about what they did. But anyway, you should be able to go to your public library digital archives, look up, newspaper articles and other things, and also ask family members and elders in your community about what they remember about any kind of co-op. And maybe you shouldn't, you don't always have to use the name co-op. They might remember it as something else, a credit union or a credit exchange or some kind of buying club or a mutual aid society. So you might have to use different words to ask people about it. So please keep doing that. At some point, I'm going to ask people if they've uncovered anything yet about their area. And you could also keep your eye out to think about what obstacles and what obstacles have been in the way of Black co-op development and what strategies might mitigate those obstacles. And I'll start to ask people about that too. Most people ask me about it. I think you guys should be able to think about and answer some of that also. Okay, I'm right on time. So now my dear friend and comrade, Curtis Haynes, has my back here and is going to keep the conversation going with you guys. It's recorded, so I will watch the recording before next session, so I know what you all said and talked about. And I will see you on October, 2 weeks from now, right? Where's my, whatever, you know when it is. 2 weeks from now, I'll see you. We'll be doing chapter 3.
Yeah, it's always the second and fourth Mondays of every month.
Of every month. So the
Every month,
second
the second-
Monday in October.
Mhm.
I'll see you then. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks, Dr. Gordon Nembhard.
You.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Dr. Haynes, I don't know if you're speaking or not, but I think you might be muted.
Yep, thank you. I'm a specialist, right? I don't know about the technology, like turn on the mute, turn off the mute. But yes, I was speaking. I was saying thank you to Dr. Gordon Nembhard for sharing her time with me. So I think, I know we got, so Rashida and Albani are going to be speaking on chapter 2. What I'd like to do is kind of set it up with regards to how the book and how both Dr. Gordon Nembhard's work and my own work came into existence. And for me, right, it came into existence because, well, let me say this. I'm currently in Buffalo, New York. I teach at a state college, Buffalo State College. I've taught in different places throughout, like I taught at Skidmore College, I taught at UMass, right? But one of the reasons I ended up at Buffalo State College was that when I was hired, Buffalo State College had an urban mission, right? So we're an urban college, right? And they had an urban mission, and sometimes the urban mission is considered a Black mission, right? And so my research, right, was in Black political economy. And the bottom line, well, I mean, there's so many different bottom lines, right? But I didn't really, like, economics found me, right? I was a student, if you're familiar with, I don't know if you in Illinois, you got those same kind of programs we have. When I was in Massachusetts, they had what was called the SEBS program, and it's like an EOP program, educational opportunity program. Me being an African-American male, at the time when I wasn't even thinking about going to college. And my mother, seeing the direction that I was headed, she's like, dude, you got to go to college, right? And so when I took the SATs, I mean, I was typical among African-American males, and we were at the bottom of the list. But it was the EOP programs that opened up the door for us, right? So I was able to go to the University of Massachusetts. I was, I had I was first generation college, right? I had no familiarity with the college life. My very first semester, I was on academic probation. But as I went through my life at the University of Massachusetts, where they call the Happy Valley, economics found me. But the problem with the economics that did find me was I didn't see myself in the economics. My personal experience, I grew up in the military. In the late 70s, early 80s, I came back to Springfield, Massachusetts, right during the crack epidemic. And mainstream economics was not speaking to the life that I was living, right? Or the life that I saw. So when I looked at my neighborhood, I saw segregation. I saw like young men, particularly, just trying to hustle to put food on the table, try to live what they perceived as a socially acceptable standard of living. And the mainstream economics did not speak to that. And so, so I was studying economics, but I was also highly influenced by, as an undergraduate, I was influenced by some professors who were teaching at what we call the New Africa House, right? And a lot of those professors, some of them didn't have PhDs, but a lot of them were revolutionaries and radicals from the 1960s. So they had a high influence on me. And I was highly influenced by the Black nationalist perspective, right? But again, the mainstream economics did not speak to that. And I just happened to, through my experience, I happened to run across Lloyd Hogan, right? He was teaching at Hampshire College. And at the time, he was writing a book called The Principles of Black Political Economy. And that pretty much saved me, right? Because where the principles of Black political economy came from was that Lloyd Hogan also, he was a student of economics. He went to the University of Chicago. And I kind of feel in my language, right? He just passed away late 90s. He was 96, 97 years old. He passed away last year, right? And, again, just like Jessica's father, he wrote a book in the last year of his life, right? So, that's my mentor. And so I feel honored to follow in his footsteps, but I feel he committed academic suicide, right? Meaning that he decided to study the Black condition in a scientific way, right? And so mainstream economics did not speak to that conversation, to that kind of study. And he ended up having to take a series of independent studies. He never got his PhD, but I would say he's probably one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, economists that you've never heard of, but you're going to hear about him in the work. And if you reading Dr. Nembhard's book, you will see references to his work. So after becoming familiar with Lloyd Hogan's work, and again, his work, he dedicated his work particularly to Black students, right, who he felt that it would be necessary for them to promulgate and to popularize this economic theory, okay? And so I studied his work. It gave me a lifeline. And not only did it give me a lifeline, but it really opened up. I mean, this was 40 years ago, but what I'm able to do today and the values and what I bring to the table today all started with the work that he started with, okay? So with Dr. Gordon Nembhard and myself, we were graduate students at the University of Massachusetts. And then we started collaborating. We were both we were blessed to be part of what we call the Third World Caucus. It was a graduate student organization of about 18, 19 students from Africa, East Africa, West Africa, Central America, Latin America. And myself, and actually the organization, it was a Third World Caucus, but the organization was established and started by myself, a African-American, and a friend of mine who was a Puerto Rican, right? And so we were also operating under the auspice of an internal colony, right? That our conditions were very similar to the conditions that other oppressed people around the world experience. So Dr. Gordon Nembhard and myself, we were highly influenced by the Third World Caucus. We did the potlucks, we talked, and we just expanded our mind about a liberation theory, right, and liberation practice. And Lloyd Hogan's work spoke to that idea of liberation theory and liberation practice. So the impact on me was that I wrote my dissertation And the title of my dissertation was The Art of Economic Cooperation, Cooperative Enterprise and Economic Development in Black America. And I defended that dissertation in 1993, and it's still relevant today, right? Maybe later on, I'll give you a website where you might want to either purchase it or, you know, find access to it. But what I wrote about was the entry point to my work was W.E.B. Du Bois. And, you know, again, you know, Du Bois was a race man, and he also studied the African American or the Black condition in a socially scientific way, right? And so I studied him, and particularly the cooperative piece. Matter of fact, I just published an article just recently about his work called From Philanthropic Black Capitalism to Socialism, Cooperativism in Du Bois's Economic Thought, right? And maybe I could give you a link to that information too, okay? But Du Bois and his prolific study of the Black condition highly influenced me, influenced the work that I did. Lloyd Hogan and his Principles of Black Political Economy. And the thing about the Principles of Black Political Economy is it became a tool to study how society and populations of people socially reproduce themselves. Like how do how people socially reproduce what is culturally significant to themselves. How people in societies reproduce political and power relationships. How people in society socially reproduce economic and relationships, how you secure your daily bread, and how you interact with environment and nature, okay? And so his work was about social reproduction, but he studied specifically the black condition. And he developed a framework, right? And the framework was under the assumption that there's a population of people, right? And Dr. Gordon Nembhard and myself, we call that population a subaltern population. This Black population is a subaltern population in the United States. And subaltern means that it's part of the broader 340 million people, but we also have our unique circumstances and our unique conditions. And so Lloyd Hogan made a decision to study that population because, you know, that was his concern. And as we mentioned before, right, like even from the title from her introduction, you know, talk about collective courage, it's a continuous and hidden history of economic defense and collective well-being, right? And so from the perspective of the economist priests, because everybody looks to the economist to say, well, what should we do, right? And so the economist gives policy prescriptions, but the mainstream economists, whether they were, from my perspective, whether they were what we call neoclassical economists, the ones who use the theory that supply and demand works, right? And then the policy prescription is laissez-faire, no government intervention, right? And then pretty much the practices are, businesses are able to pursue the consciousness of the business is to pursue profits and minimizing costs. And that's the theory, the policy, and the practice, but it really didn't speak to the Black condition. So a lot of times, like when I was doing my applied research here in Buffalo, introducing people to cooperative concepts, sometimes, the entrepreneurs, the small business people were like, no, that's social work. That's not, we trying to make some money, right? But you're trying to help people, right? And you can't make money in helping people, right? And so that was the kind of the debates that were going on in the context of applying the research, right? And what I found is the reason they talk like that, because at the same time, they talked like that with regards to enterprise development, but you did cooperate in church, right? You did Black church, right? There are plenty of examples of cooperation. They were more social in a broad framework, but there was not a construct that put it all together. But Lloyd Hogan's work was the construct that was able to put it all together. And so my own particular work is in the field of theory. And right now I'm strongly in the area of paradigm development, right? I'm using the alternative paradigm of Black political economy. And Black political economy does speak to the socioeconomic condition of the Black American, but the framework is also a framework that you could use it as a tool to study any grouping of people, whether it's the 340 million people in the United States according to the census, or whether it's the 300,000 people in Buffalo, right? You could use the framework, but Lloyd Hogan used the framework as a tool to study the Black condition, because mainstream economics was definitely, I mean, they had data, right? But they could not explain the socioeconomic conditions in an effective way that could lead to socioeconomic uplift. Lloyd Hogan's work did. And then the last piece, and then I'm going to hand it over and move closer to the book, right? But again, I just want to give you the framework of how Jessica and myself got involved with this, right? The last piece, and you'll be talking about this later, is that we studied this cooperative organization called the Mandagon Cooperatives, right? And they were in the Basque lands of Spain. And so one of the dilemmas of the cooperative is that it has been very difficult for cooperatives to get economies of scale, meaning that they could scale up, go from a small organization of 5, 10, 15 people to an organization of 100 people, an organization of 1,000 people, and still fulfilling the idea of representative democracy. But Mondragon in Spain, the Basque people who were in the Basque lands of Spain, where the Mondragon cooperative system was founded, they did start what they called, initially it was called the Cooperative Experiment. And today it's a organization with, I don't know, I think maybe 70,000, 80,000 members, and it's a representative democracy organization, right? And so Jessica and myself, we looked at that and saying that model, even though people were calling it a noble experiment, we were saying that model fits, right, the Black condition in the United States. Now, my applied research has shown that, like, again, we cannot replicate exactly that model, but it is a good prototype because we got to build our own model based on the unique socioeconomic conditions that we're experiencing here in the United States of America. Okay, so during the 1990s, Jessica and myself, we were traveling around both nationally and internationally talking about cooperative economics. And a lot of the responses were, well, where are where's the cooperative stuff, right? You know, you're talking, it sounds beautiful what you're talking about, but where are the examples? So Jessica, her work moved to the empirical stuff where she developed and she studied and she uncovered that cooperative work, right? And that's what you're reading right now. My own work was, I went to in the direction of theory, right? So my battleground, what I chose as my battleground is the realm of theory, right? And the significance of theory is that the framework, like right now, we're all talking about cooperation, economic cooperation. And a lot of times that cooperation and economic cooperation is just feel good. We just know that it's right. We know that it's something that we're supposed to do, but we don't know exactly how to organize our thoughts around it. So as I conclude this part of my introduction is that my work, again, is theory. The alternative paradigm is Black political economy. And again, this is the entry point, okay? And then the policy stuff is cooperative economic policy. This is what we're sharing with you. And then the applied stuff, the grassroots, the street level stuff that we do is called, in this particular paradigm, is called community building practices. And so we go from theory to policy to practice, okay? So with regards to what is presented in Collective Courage, I just want to, again, make clear that what you do and what I do, you know, now we have a framework that says that cooperation is not just something that feels good. Again, like I said, I talked to entrepreneurs and businessmen here in Buffalo, and initially their perspective was, no, we're about making money, we're about profits. But the particular framework that I'm working on right now is that we're shifting, we're using Black political economy to shift away from mainstream economics, what I call economics of scarcity. I call it the Old Testament, right? Using the Bible as a metaphor, right? The economics of scarcity was the old way, right? And then we use Black political economy as a bridge to the new way, right? And the new way is economics of abundance. And the way we get from the economics of scarcity and the economics of abundance is Black political economy. Now, there's a lot of conversation out there about prosperity economics and all that, right? But what is really important is that we understand and that we project, right, that we have a framework that says economic abundance. That's our right, right? That's what we're supposed to do. We build the road as we travel. We idealize the most ideal vision of what perfection would look like in terms of the world that we want to see, right? The heights of human perfectibility, and we make it happen. And anybody who wants to follow in that framework, we're saying, look, you got to go through Black America to understand the direction going from economics of scarcity to economics of abundance. So chapter 2 is part of our history, right? It's from economic independence to political advocacy. And then after Rashida and Albani speak on this, right, I think Dr. Nembhard did say that 1880s and 2020, right, you know, that there's a lot of parallels in that. And one of the discussions about this economic independence to political advocacy, and this is open to you, right? What do we do? Right? This has always been a big debate in the cooperative movement. Do we engage with politics or do we keep it moving? Right? Do we focus on the cooperative movement? Because one thing that happened in the Basque lands of Spain, right? They were far from the maddening crowd, right? It was a village, and they were, even though they were under Franco, right? The fascist dictator Franco, right? And the father Jose Arzamendi was banished to this small village, right? And he started cooperative education and built and introduced this cooperative model, right? They didn't really engage the political system. They built, you know, in the shadows. And today it's become a multi-billion-dollar organization built on representative democracy. So following in the footsteps of, or in the concept of what we're seeing in chapter 2 is, where do we want to play? Do we push political advocacy? Do we want to engage significantly in the political environment that we're dealing with? Or do we keep it moving, be apolitical? Right? And those are some serious questions and serious things that I would love to hear what you would have to say about those, because those are really important. One of the things about politics, right? You know, a lot of times when we look at politics, we're looking at somebody else to save us. But the bottom line, we have to save ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to the two young ladies who volunteered to summarize and develop an interpretation and their opinions with regard to chapter 2. So who wants to go first, Rashida or Albani?
I can go.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I guess short answer to your last question, although it's not a short, it doesn't deserve a short answer, is both and. You know, you can't ignore politics, but you can't make it complete and think that politics alone is going to save us as a community, because it never has and it never will. But okay, I digress. So chapter 2, I guess I saw a lot of chapter 2 is really just kind of showing organizational rises and falls, I suppose, but defeats not being defeats. I guess I really like that position that Dr. Nembhard presented. And really it was talking about post-Reconstruction and mostly in the South, there was a lot of movement with Black folks coming together. How do you survive when most Black people were slaves and left that and went into a new form of slavery, of sharecropping and debt peonage? So the first example is the Knights of Labor, which was an example that didn't initially allow, I don't think, Black membership. I wrote this about a week ago, but Blacks were not allowed to join, and then eventually were able to join and began to kind of grow. And as that organization became a little bit more radical, one of the things that happened is it triggered violence and repression from white neighbors and businesses, which resulted in that cooperative kind of dismantling to a degree and going underground. And it was that theory, that process was kind of repeated. So there will be other organizations that will rise up in place of something like a Knights of Labor. And then you have the Cooperative Workers of America. They were really kind of working on, I think their goal was trying to decrease reliance on the credit system through sharecropping. And that became progressive and kind of militant. And then the same thing. So you had this violence and repression as a backlash to that. But many of the members of the Cooperative Workers of America were landless farmers with large families. So kind of the typical sharecropping family during that time. And I think after the CWA kind of dismantled, well, before it dismantled, it became a little bit more politically savvy and worked to work on repressive labor laws and wanted to implement wage guarantees and free cooperative schools. And that obviously triggered violence and repression, and that kind of dismantled. And then later on, you had the Colored Farmers Alliance that came along, which had the white leadership at the top, but I think it was mostly the local leadership was all Black, and that kind of comprised both. So they had aspects of the Mutual Aid Society, but really sought to increase Black political participation, which that resulted in repression and violence. So that was kind of like the cycle that you saw post Reconstruction, which is, I agree, very analogous to today. A lot of people argue that after Barack Obama left office, as a direct result, you get the complete opposite and antithesis of that. Whenever you have this idea of Black empowerment, there's the kind of counter result of that, of open repression and violence and that kind of aspect. So that was my notes.
Okay. Thank you. Before we go to Avani, any comments or questions on that?
I liked the parallels you drew between, the empowerment of the Black community, through a lot of these cooperative movements, and the almost cyclical nature of how, violent repression is normally the answer to that, or the repercussion of that, and kind of tying that into how Obama was seen as a, huge milestone of Black empowerment, which, that can be debated, whatever, but how that was then answered by possibly an actual fascist. So, I think that's a very good parallel to draw there that I didn't think of myself.
Yeah, I always kind of, not always, but I kind of see it as it's whether it's real or not, it's the perception of it. And that perception triggers something that's really hard to rationalize because it's not rational, right? We know statistically it's not accurate. Life didn't change drastically, arguably, for most Black people with the election of Barack Obama, but it doesn't match reality, and it doesn't have to because it's not rational. So, yeah.
Anybody else? All right, so let's continue. Can you continue the review, Avani?
Okay. So my key takeaways from this chapter essentially were that, first, to answer your question, I will echo what Ms. Rashida said, which was that I don't believe that everything should be put into politics, but I don't think that we should try and do everything on our own either. I think that in this world, like, balance is really is like a huge key to life. And so some of the main things, that I kind of took from this were how essentially everything started and was rooted in community, and then transitioned into ideologies that I guess formed the populist movement, or at least strengthened it, from what I gathered here. Um, I I was very fond of the Knights of Labor because of um, how much of an impact they had, even when they kind of quote unquote went under, because they were just kind of like, I imagined a huge building that just kind of sunk in quicksand, but not so much like quicksand, like a bubbling water. And so every time that something would pop up, it would look different, but it still represented some piece of like the huge structure that it once was before. Um, and in each structure that came from that was one that still was going after the mission of ensuring that there was more of equity and equality going on, and actually more of a sustainability, like a self-sustainability for the Black community. um, I what I really liked, honestly, and what shocked me when I was reading it, was that women were given a position of leadership, and were given roles that I thought would definitely go to a man, especially in this time period, um, because white women didn't get the right to vote till like the 1920s, and then colored people came next. And so this is like the 1880s, 1890s going on, and women are kind of given a position of power. So that shocked me, but it was a good shock. It wasn't like a bad one. And then the Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union. Um, I loved, there's like, okay, so when we were talking about it, sorry, I'm cracking myself up before I even get to it, but like, when we were talking, or when Dr. Gordon Nembhard was here, and she had talked about how it was spearheaded, by a white man in power, but it was essentially just like all Black. There's a quote that I always hear, particularly in reference to the music industry, but it's a quote that said that there's always a white man. So it could be like a picture that's like mostly Black, but there's just like always a white man there. And I just thought that was hilarious, how it's still like a cycle that we're in, where integration is not avoidable. Like I believe that it really, in order to prosper and to really go far, like integration is necessary to an extent. We can operate separately, but at some point we do have to come together and push forward a mutual agenda, a mutually serving agenda. Um, Nevertheless, that doesn't take away from the fact that this is literally a chapter full of examples of how Black people were able to come together and work with one another, which completely refutes the belief that we can't do those things. Um, and then the last thing, that I I I kind of touched on in the beginning, was that the shift in the focus to politics. I noted that, African Americans were all for supporting initiatives of their white counterparts that supported them and helped them, but they were very quick to kind of say, no, we will not be subordinate. You will have to look at us like we are human beings, that we are equals. And so um, that's what I thought was super dope throughout this chapter. That's my quick summary.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, so what I would want to say with regards to women being given a position, they were given those positions, they took them.
What's that?
They were not given those positions, they took them, right? I think that's really important today, right? Is that, it's time, I mean, these are critical times. It's times for women, men, it's time for everybody to step up. and build the alternative model so that it's no longer an alternative model, right? Then the issue of integration is necessary, right? One thing about Black political economy is that the beauty of it, right, is that it tells the story of how our socioeconomic conditions that we're experiencing today came about, right? But again, what Lloyd Hogan was directing us towards, right, is that the unique socioeconomic condition of the Black American puts us in a situation where we as Black Americans can be exemplars. We can show the rest of the world how to take an exploitative situation and turn it into a tool for human betterment. So, so like I could speak with regard to my own development, is that, I'm, like I said, I think what Black political economy did, it allowed me to see myself, right? It allowed me to see myself, I already saw myself as a human being, right? But I couldn't get my mind and my heart around this socioeconomic discrepancies that I saw, right? Not only here in the United States, but it's like when you see when you see that Africa is in terms of raw materials, the richest continent on the planet, but the population has to deal with so much poverty, right? I couldn't understand that. I couldn't get my mind around that. But Black political economy has helped me get my mind around it. And now I understand it, for me is that I'm on a on a human journey, right? I always have been. I took my path from the perspective of a Black American, but as I walk around, you could see the lights in somebody's eyes and know that you're in the same, you're on the same vibration. You're vibrating at the same level, and we talk, which is very similar, ascending life for one and for all, right? Do unto others as you would have them do upon yourself, right? The language of a New Testament, the language we're using here in Buffalo in our business development is we're using the language of love, right? And again, I'm a social scientist, right? And so it's rare using the old paradigm to discuss love in economics and business. But in the language of a new paradigm, it's the core, it's the center, right? Okay, so thank you. So we could open it up for discussion. If there's anything that you might want to ask me with regards to my perspectives on collective courage, maybe some of the things that I've done are just the, whatever. Okay.
As a young man, you were talking about your journey to, it was policy and then the framework. The policy piece, you speak about Dr. Lloyd's helping you get to the three portions of how you divide up, how you talk about, how you think about Black economy. And so the last piece was the actual grassroots part. The middle part was the policy, and the first part was
The theory.
the theory. That's right, that's theory. And so with the policy part, is that where the politicalness started to come in, and how one has to look around, no matter how much grassroots you're trying to do, you have to look around and be involved in the politicalness of the environment that you're in? Is that what you're saying?
That's definitely part of it. So again, like I said, my battleground, right, is in theory. And so what I mean by that is, like, when I teach, right, when I interact, I start with what I call epistemology, which is the theory of knowing, right? The theory of knowledge, how we justify our beliefs, right? So you have a belief, I have a belief, and then how do we justify those beliefs, okay? And so, here in the West, we have science, right? We have particular kinds of religion. So we have our beliefs and we justify our beliefs because we're Christian. Or we justify our beliefs because we perceive ourselves as Black. Or we justify our beliefs because we see ourselves as Jewish, right? Or we see ourselves as Muslim, right? And so, so when I say I'm doing my battleground is the realm of theory, is that I came to understand that, right? That we all have our perspectives, right? And a lot of those perspectives are received from culture and past experiences that have been handed down by our ancestors, both living and dead. But it's not necessarily the fact that we have to have a linear movement from what was handed to us by our ancestors. What I mean by that is, for example, our ancestors handed us this capitalist system that we're dealing with right now. They handed that to us. Now, do we need to continue with that system? Or so a big question is, do we reform that which was handed to us? Or do we kind of almost like instantaneously say, no, we're not going to have that. I got ideas inside my head, right? And that I'm going to work on taking those ideas and have them manifest. The significance of this is that, again, the mainstream economics, it was revolutionary during the time period of Adam Smith, right? So when Adam Smith was studying the transition in Europe from feudalism to capitalism, he came up with a book called An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations. And what he was speaking on was that Europe was in this dark ages for 1,000 years with the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? And it was religion that held Europe together, but it held it together in darkness. And then here comes this industrial revolution. Here comes the introduction of money, right? Here comes, right, these new forms of human relationship, right? And so he wrote a book called, again, in 1776, the Inquiry of the Wealth of Nations came into existence. So the work, right, that work was developed and reformed throughout the 18th century. It was developed and reformed throughout the 19th century, and it was developed and reformed throughout the 20th century. But it's still a 17th century or 18th century book. And it was dealing with the socioeconomic conditions of that time period. So it was revolutionary in that time period, but today it's creating the status quo, right? It justifies the huge amount of profits that companies make, saying that it's good to be greedy, for example, right? That's the language of the mainstream model. It's good to be greedy, right? The mainstream model also focuses on stuff, right? It focuses on products, right? But anything, if you just look around your room right now, anything that was made by a human being first started in the mind of a man or a woman. It started there. But the language doesn't cover that. So coming back to the cooperative economic policy, again, we're coming, I'm working on, and we are working on a full, we want to be as full and complex and vibrant as the mainstream model was, because they go from theory where the economic priest, the stuff is taught in academia, right? And if you're taught something, you believe it. When I was an undergraduate, I believed the professor. I thought he was telling the truth. But what I understand, he was telling his truth. It wasn't absolute truth with a capital T. And now I'm conscious of that. So like what I tell the students that I'm dealing with right now is that even when I talk, right, I want them to be very familiar with what I call the 4 C's, right? In terms of thinking and in terms of consciousness, right? In terms of thinking, and this is coming out of, this is the applied part of the cooperative policy and Black political economy. The 4 C's is that today, 21st century, in the information and knowledge age, what's going to be critical to develop a transformative political economy is that we need to learn and we need to embrace being curious, right? We need to be curious about other human beings, curious about things, right? And that curious thinking and curious consciousness is important. We also need to be critical, right? We need critical thinking, okay? But a lot of times in academia, it stops at critical thinking. So we're taught, in the colleges, we're taught to be critical thinkers, right? And we develop a critical consciousness. But a lot of times we're critical thinkers about other things, about other people, right? But a critical part of being a critical thinker is self-criticism. I got involved with the cooperative movement here in Buffalo, New York, and we had a failure too, right? But it was a failure. It was a reform, and that failure, my finger was pointing this way, right? But I had three fingers pointing back at me, realizing that I was angry. I was blaming everybody else for our failure. But then I realized, no, we weren't ready, right? We were not ready for it. So that was my critical thinking. What I want the young men and women that come through my educational program is to also be creative thinkers, right? Embrace their creativity, right? This is the 21st century. We're not in the industrial age anymore. The industrial age paid you to be a good worker and do what you were told. We're in the 21st century, and if we're going to be at the cutting edges of the 21st century, we got to embrace knowledge, information, and wisdom, right? And to do that, it's critical to be creative thinkers. But then again, if you're a creative thinker, that's not enough either, right? Because we could be creative, right? But if we're going to provide solutions into the 21st century, right, we got to be constructive thinkers. We got to create the new world. We got to build the world as we travel. So that's the idea. That's the framework. Is that right now it's perceived as an alternative framework. For me, it's my core framework. It's how I see the world. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's not often that we have an opportunity to dig deep around theory and reality and how those pieces then inform your practices. So shout out for that. The question I have is, what's different about this moment, if there is anything different, relative to the 1880s? Beautiful. What are the uniqueness of this place we find ourselves?
All right. So again, in terms of, I'm gonna present it. I balance between being an academic and a scholar and a practitioner, right? So I'm going to give you a scholastic answer, and maybe we could pull some of the fluidity out of it, right? But the academic answer is that, particularly for the Black American, right? Or I could even say the U.S. capitalist political economy in general. What I learned through Lloyd Hogan's work, right? He set up a framework recognizing that, like right now, generally, like if I was to ask my college students about what economics is about, most college students say economics is about money, right? And I don't know, do you feel that way? Anybody in this seminar right here? Well, so a lot of college students would say economics is about money, but what Lloyd Hogan said, right, that economics is about securing your daily bread, right? Putting food on the table, okay? And political economy is about social reproduction. So I would have two frameworks, right? So you got political economy going one side, economics going on the other side. So when we look at the socioeconomic development, so let me present it in a general framework first, and then present it in the context of African Americans, right? In the general framework is that we've, the most broadest sense is that we've transitioned from different political economies, starting with, depending on where we're at on the planet, from communal roots somewhere on the planet, right? And the human beings organize themselves in a communal way. That's a political economy. That's social reproduction. That's about the people. The economics of that was hunter-gatherer, right? So the way you secured your daily bread, the way you put food on the table in those communal villages is that you went out hunting and you gathered, right? That was the economics of it, and that was the political economy of it. Throughout different places along the planet, there was a transition, and I'm not going to get with regard to how that transition takes place, right? But you also have slave political economies, where you have a hierarchy where some human beings, for whatever reason, perceive themselves are at a higher, as at a superior to other human beings, and they're able to oppress or exploit. and steal the wealth off the backs of other human beings, right? And a lot of those political economies that were slavery were also agricultural, right? So there's a lot of so the way you were able to put food on the table was through farming, whether it was mass plantation farming or whether it was subsistence farming, you know, on a small piece of land, okay? And then again, following this is a derivative of Marxism, right? But again, this is Lloyd Hogan's interpretation. And what Lloyd Hogan did is he synthesized Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and W.E.B. Du Bois. He pulled those three together and came up with his own perspective of what we call Black political economy. So after slavery, you have the feudal political economy, right? In feudal political economy, the social contract, the level of exploitation is built off of ownership of the land, right? And it's not quite the same as slavery. It's different than slavery, right? A different kind of exploitation. And the economics associated with that is is also agricultural, right? It's a different kind of agricultural, but it's also agricultural. Then after that, then you have the capitalist political economy. And that's the one that you and I, you know, our lives were built starting in the transition in Europe from feudalism to capitalism, right? In the 1700s when Adam Smith was seeing this transition, right? But the economics associated with that capitalist political economy, where you have private ownership of the means of production, you have market economies where you buy and sell labor, buy and sell goods and services, and that the wealth is accumulated to the owners of the means of production, and workers have all they have in terms of what they own is their ability to work. Well, that started in the 1700s, like for real, right? And that went from the 1700s to 1800s to the 1900s. The economics associated with that was the industrial economy, mass production and hierarchical management. So in the 1880s and in the early 1900s, right, people were able to, you know, people were, especially here in the North, you could go with a very limited scholastic education and get a job at Bethlehem Steel. You could get a job in the steel factories. You get a job at the automobile factories, right? With very minimal forms of education, as long as you had a good work ethic and you were willing to put the time in, right? Now that's pretty much what brought us to today. Today, and coming full circle to you, what your question is, we are currently in the information age and the knowledge age. So the difference is that the late 1880s was a period for Black Americans. We were, in that time period, we were in a sharecropping time period. And using Lloyd Hogan's language, that was a feudal period, right? Where the landlord owned the land and you had a co-op, you know, it was quote theory, the theory was 50-50. You work my land, right? And you give me 50% of the product, right? And the produce, and you keep 50%, but you know that 50 became 90-10, right? But that was the framework when pretty much the civil rights, so that was the, you know, post-slavery, right? Up until the 1960s, right? During that time period, all the migrations from the South to the North, right, was a lot of times it was a push-pull migration, meaning that the racist institutions of the South pushed people away, and the call of jobs in the North pulled people, right? But it was industrial. But by the time the Black America was completely in the capitalist political economy, it started to transition from an industrial capitalist political economy, an industrial economy, capitalist political economy. So for example, here, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, we were at one point the steel belt, we became the Rust Belt, right? So when we became the Rust Belt, the opportunity for unskilled labor, quote unquote unskilled, those with poor scholastic skills, you know, you could be an elementary school dropout, you could be a high school dropout, you could be a junior high school dropout, and you could get a good job in a steel mill. You could get a good job in some kind of factory. But in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, when Black Americans were completely, fully in the capitalist political economy, leaving sharecropping with the separate and unequal form of education that they experienced, right? They came to the urban centers without the kind of education that would prepare them for the knowledge age and the information age. So the industrial age in US capitalism. So in the late 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, right, the US capitalist economy, right, made the transition, is making, and pretty much the pandemic, put the death nail into the industrial age in the United States of America. Now we are 100% in the information age and in 100% in the knowledge age. And the last point, the significance of this is that, and this is, again, this is my, the social economic aspect of it, is that what is important for us today is that we tie our star to the information age and the knowledge age, opening up the door to the wisdom age, right? But if we hold on to the industrial age, we're going in the wrong direction. So what I mean by that is that when, and I'll stop my talk right here, but when we transition economically, right, from hunter-gatherer to agricultural, right? Well, that transition, the majority of hunter-gatherers lost their ability to earn survival methods without transitioning to agriculture, right? So 90%, 95% of hunters, like right now, nobody really hunts, right? The hunters, I mean, if you do hunt, it's trophy hunting. You might be able to get some deer or what have you, but you're not really, the majority of American people do not survive as hunters. They do not survive as farmers. They do not just survive fishing, right? We survive by our skills that generate a form of income, that generate a form of money. So the agricultural age made the hunter-gatherer obsolete, but it brought in exponential change to human civilization. And the same thing from transitioning from the agricultural age to the industrial age, right? Right now, today, 1% of the American population produces all the food for the Americans, for the United States population, and a significant part of the rest of the world. So the majority of farmers, right, lost their ability to survive. Most farmers, you can't make a living being a farmer, right? But what did the industrial age do? It opened up, it developed exponential growth, right? The kind of capitalism and industrial development is kind of what we receive. The significance for us today is that the industrial age, if you hit yourself to the industrial age, right, that is in the United States, that's the past. We as unskilled or industrial workers, we are not going to compete with Chinese workers willing to work for 25 cents an hour. It's not going to happen, right? Nobody wants to compete with 25 cents an hour. So, but the information age and the knowledge age, is my view, is going to generate exponential change for society. We're already seeing it. We're seeing it with the phones that we have. We're seeing it with the technology. We're doing it right now. We're experiencing it right now. And this is only just the beginning, right? And so the difference between 1880, we were in the Black community, we were in a feudal time period. And then in the 1960s, the whole civil rights movement was the end of that feudal time period. Black Americans entered into the industrial age right at a time period when it was transitioning to the point that we moved from the steel belt to the rust belt, right? And now we're in a information and knowledge age. And so our cooperative movements, whatever we decide to do in terms of theory, policy, and practice, we need to link to cooperation. The significance of this, if we link ourselves to the knowledge age, a lot of people say, well, Dr. Haynes, what industry is the most important industry? I would say unequivocally, the industry of the 21st century is the industry of the human being, where the human being finds its potential. You find your potential. We create conditions where human beings can reach the heights of their potential. This 21st century, the information age, right? Being able to take information, convert it into intelligence, take intelligence to be able to convert it into knowledge, take knowledge and experience and being able to convert it into wisdom. We've done it in the past, right? We've done it, our grandparents did it, right? But now we're saying that is the foundation of the 21st century that we're experiencing right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I
Okay,
just
well-
really got to sit and take that all in, you know. That's
Oh.
that was a girl. I was sitting there like, man, dang, this is gonna be a good conversation. Can't wait to go back and watch the recording.
Well, I agree, right? I think that what I shared with you is definitely something to meditate on, right? But I would say that we have to be very clear and very respectful and understanding that Black Americans, right? We as Black Americans, we appreciate all the help of our allies, right? But we're bringing something to the table. You haven't seen it, right? I mean, it's, again, as Dr. Nembhard said, it's a continuous and hidden history, but we're bringing it to the table. So for all our allies, not only just come and look to us to help us, look to us and listen from us. We got something, we're bringing something to the table too, not just for Black Americans, but for all humanity.
I personally think that that's a big factor in, we talk about moving from, cooperative movements, or, should we work from inside or outside of the system? And I personally, I don't think I do think it's a balance. Of course, I do think you should work within your political systems if they exist, to the furthest extent that you can. I wouldn't say not to. But at the same time, I think one of the best ways to lead movements like that is to lead by example. So, if they can establish a 70,000 man cooperative in Spain, Brazil,
Spain, northern Spain.
Okay, so if they can do that in Spain outside of the government, like you said, it might not be the, point for point way to go about it, but it's at the very least a framework we can go off of. And leading by that example, you're going to draw people in. And then once you get enough people, once you establish enough those human connections, then you can take that into the political sphere so much more easily than, with smaller grassroots movements, in my eyes. I feel like it allows for more consolidation of power when you lead by example and people want to come to you instead of you having to go to them.
Yes, I mean, I want to stress that self-confidence is attractive, right? When you make a movement and you present yourself in a particular way and you exhibit a lot of self-confidence. So if you're self-confident about the cooperative movement, right? And then that self-confidence translates into success, right? Both for you as a human being, but also translates into financial success. That's the demonstration. So a lot of times, we look to help outside of our bodies, right? But again, I agree with you, sir, that we start with that the solution, right, in the beginning is through demonstration. We have to demonstrate the truth. Demonstrate the truth with a little t, meaning my own personal truth as a human being, right? But I would say we also have to demonstrate truth with a capital T. And for me, truth with a capital T is love, right? Love of self, love of community, love of family, right? Recognize, and also, right, again, like I said, I'm in front of you right now, right? I came from the perspective, like, again, when I was in elementary school, I remember I was dropped off from school by my mother. I was about 8, 9 years old, right? I was dropped off at school by my mom, right? And one of my classmates said, "I didn't know your mom was white," right? And I looked up and like, damn, I didn't know she was white either, right? So so I developed a consciousness, right? And I developed a Black consciousness, and it was culture, it was power, right? It was institutional racism, it was bigotry. All of that put me into. I found myself in the realm of being a Black American, right? But today, I see myself as multidimensional, right? I see myself as a spiritual being having a material experience. And so I think that idea of us being bigger than me being bigger than what you see in the camera right here, that's the language of the 21st century.
I've got a quick question for you. This is Deja. One of the things, you talked about the need for having an enabling policy environment in order to make co-ops, to enable, co-ops. So my question for you is, how do you, what kind of, so in your own experience, like for instance, in Buffalo, what types of policies did you see or would you have wanted to see from kind of local or state or even national authorities? And what are the ways to organize around helping to create that policy environment that's going to be enabling for co-ops?
Okay, good question. Thank you. So here in Buffalo, right, we did our applied work, but it's clear that over the years, so a lot of my applied work that I'm talking about was in the 1990s, right? But what has happened is that there has been a strong cooperative movement here in Buffalo, both Black and white, again, recognizing Black and white as socially constructed concepts, right? And the people involved, they've started small cooperatives, but they've influenced state legislation, right? So some of the legislation in New York State has been influenced by the grassroots people who are pushing the model. So what I would say is that, we have almost a superhuman task in front of us, because we got to walk that knife edge of putting food on the table, securing our daily bread, feeding ourselves while influencing policy, right? So W.B. Du Bois, right, in one of his very last speeches before he went to Ghana, right, he was around 90-something years old, right? He was saying that even though he went from philanthropic Black capitalism to the cooperative commonwealth to socialism to communism, right? Even though he made those transitions, he never gave up on cooperativism. And what he said in his very last speech was that, in the very last speech was that, cooperativism, whether it survives or dies, is really going to depend on government, whether the government supports it or doesn't support it, right? If the government doesn't support it, it's going to die. And if it does support it, it's going to survive. And he called it socialism. That his brand of socialism. So yes, we're going to have to walk that fine line between policy, right, and practice. And it's a tough fine line. We're going to have to be superhuman, right? But we are masters of our own destiny. And so self-confidence, strength of will, strength of character, allowing your mind to be the servant of your heart, right? Those things have to be applied in the 21st century. Okay.
I had just wanted to, just kind of go in on that same idea of support for cooperatives. You said that you were involved there in Buffalo, and I'm sure with your background, your passion, your tenacity about it, you were ready.
Hold on 1 second. I just got to get the door. I'll be back in 15 seconds.
Okay.
So do we know if in Indiana, in Indianapolis, like locally or statewide, if there is a movement or kind of a government policy to support cooperatives?
Okay.
We are looking at that CLT, which would be a kind of a cooperative. And we know that there's someone in the city council that is all for it and has been working with some consultant that came in, was hired by the
what's a CLT?
Community Land Trust.
And trust, okay. Got it.
To where people gather together. And
I'm familiar with that. I just didn't know the acronym.
Right, it wasn't a chamber, it's the city, the deputy mayor in economics or something. And he has been actively working on and has the lawyer there at the city working to look at the policies that need to be changed to help influence the CLTs positively. But Dr. Haynes, I just wanted to ask you, since you've had an experience with the co-op, and we are working on co-ops here in Indianapolis, since you had that experience and you said that it didn't quite jump off the ground. I mean, what was your learned experience? You needed to have a study group, or you needed more people to know about it. But what was your experience that you can share with us that would improve our efforts at our cooperatives?
Okay. So actually if you go on YouTube, there's a piece called Dr. Haynes and Spiritual Economics, right? And so if you just check it out, the story of with regard to your question, it's about an hour, 45 minutes, right? And it would explain how the trajectory that I went through. But I would say the experience, again, we had thousands of people, like once they figured out what a community-owned supermarket was, what a privately owned supermarket is, a huge number of people from the east side of the city, primarily African-American, they filled out paperwork, they filled out forms saying, we want a community-owned supermarket, right? But the powers that be, right, they told us that if you had a business plan, if you had a wholesaler and you had community support, they would support. They would provide like $100,000, $200,000 to kickstart it, but they reneged on it, okay? And we ended up getting, we had a food desert, but we ended up getting a privately owned supermarket, but that was rooted in the grassroots, efforts, right? But and even on campus, we got like a $500,000 grant for that to happen. But that money disappeared. And what I mean by disappeared, it was payroll for people on campus, and it didn't go into the community where we gathered all the statistics. So that really, like when that happened, right, I just, I went into a shell, right? I kind of disappeared, right? And I reevaluated, and then it took me a few years to come back. But the lesson that I learned is that, you could teach, it's like you could teach tools, you could teach communication, but the most important form of communication, 90% of communication that what probably we were confused about, right, was that 90% of communication is internal, right? You and your God, you and your relationship to a higher power, to the point that if you can communicate to yourself, right, me, myself, and I, in relationship with your God, however you see it, right, and develop this supreme level of courage, develop this supreme level of willpower, develop this supreme vision, right, of the most ideal idea, right, that's the solution, right? So we were pushing technique, right? We were saying, okay, this is how you do it, right? These are the techniques, these are this, right? And so what we found was that technique was probably less than 5 or 10% of what was important. The most important piece was the courage. The most important piece was the vision. The most important piece, as the young man over here said, was demonstrating that, the truth, your confidence, your self-confidence, your self-belief, right? And demonstrating in a way that it would show up and manifest in the cooperative. So that was the most important thing. That's what I would share with you, right? The techniques, you're going to get the techniques. What we need to build right now is teach how to reach high levels of self-confidence, right? High levels of self-confidence, and apply that self-confidence in the things that we do.
Now, what did you say that was? Did you mention that 1.5 hour? I'm going to write it down.
Dr. Haynes and Spiritual Economics on YouTube.
Dr.
I
Haynes.
posted the link in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Doc.
All right. Okay. All right. So I don't know. Are we we done?
Sure, I just have a quick follow-up question on that. So is it that although there are thousands of people that signed up, that here, I'll just put my camera thing. Although there were a few thousand people who signed up, was it just that they didn't have the confidence that this was going to be able to happen? I'm just trying to understand the disconnect between them wanting to do it and then being able to really get behind it.
Thank you again. Beautiful question, right? It was the leadership team, right? So those thousands of people, they believed in what we were doing, right? But you know, me being a college professor, and we had scholar activists, we had a lot of young folks involved, right? But the struggle was a protracted struggle, right? And we focused on tools and techniques. A lot of the young folks, right? So in the end, like at the end of, you know, it was like a 3-4 year process, right? But at the end, those college students, those young people, I mean, they had to go feed themselves. They had to go secure their own daily bread. So at the end, it was just the elders, the ones who were retired, the ones who were in church. They were the ones who were left holding it down. And so it was, holding it down. I mean, and your hats go off to them, right? They kept it going, but without young people, it couldn't continue very, very far, right? And so, again, it's what we have to say is that, and from my perspective and what I'm doing right now, saying that we have control over theory now. We don't need to use their models for our theory. We got control over policy. We don't need their models for our policy. We got control over practice, right? So theory, policy, and practice, the framework says that, okay, you could operate in this framework and it makes sense. And so now what is necessary is to strengthen our beliefs in ourselves, our ability to pull it off, right? And not as, I mean, because you've been around people, right? Some people have a lot of confidence, and some people, like, they have to blossom into their confidence. But what we taught was techniques. And so maybe when I come on another time, I could explain further the stuff that I'm doing here in Buffalo in the present, right? But in the present, the way our entry point into the study of economics is the individual in studying the art and science of being successful. That's what our high school kids need. That's what our elementary school kids need, right? So that I mean, a lot of their acting out is because, they're not sure how to handle this, what we're giving them. And their teachers don't know how to handle it either.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think, even some of those success and some of those early steps will then maybe, breed the mentality of success and confidence that you can then build off of.
Yeah,
go ahead. I got disconnected earlier, but I just wanted to ditto your point about courage. That, of course, the policies are important, and we need to learn about those and how to influence and impact those. Our journey to this place, this moment, actually is tied to some courage with Paulette and Pambana a few years ago when the state organization decided they were going to do a conference on Black experience, Black co-ops. And the state organization launched this idea and, of course, had not included folks who were already engaged in the work. So we reached out, had a meeting, said, hey, we want to be involved in influencing and shaping this conference. And so out of that, of course, we met Jessica, who came to the first conference, and then came to the second conference. Yeah. So all that came not out of any direct relationships with power, but our own agency and decision to walk that particular model forward. Later, when the grocery store closed in the neighborhood, we launched a community controlled food initiative. It's actually a co-op, not a formal one in the traditional sense, but again, modeling the action and behavior about what we can do in our own space with our own agency. But if you look around your communities, co-ops exist all around our spaces. We are working and collaborating with each other on the regular, either through shared rides, food, wisdom with our elders and those kinds of things. It's all around us. We don't speak to it so clearly out of our own lens, but these other things, of course, we need to look at and then utilize those spaces and relationships and bring about those other kinds of changes that will allow us to do it more effectively. So yet this theoretical idea of courage is often it's difficult to get your hands around because it's so invisible. It's not so tangible. But if we model it and stay on the road, it manifests itself and it moves forward. So,
Or if you also let people know that this isn't such a great leap because you're already doing it. So it makes it like, so again, for instance, in the beginning, I wasn't thinking I was part of a co-op, and then I realized, oh yeah, well, I've been a member of a credit union for 20 years, and I do all of my banking through that credit union, and that's co-op. Oh, I used to be a part of a childcare / kind of play date co-op thing, and when I was in DC, a neighborhood where the parents got together, and twice a week for a couple of hours, 2 parents would volunteer, and they would like kind of form these play exercises, so forth, with kids, and my husband or I would have to sign up for shifts, and so that was part of a kind of a child care co-op that my older son was involved in. So I think that and I think we talked about this in one of the earlier conversations, by showing people that these are things that you're already doing in your life, like you talked about, of course, child care, but you also talked about transportation. So that gives people the confidence that, oh, this is possible, this can work, and this is something of value. And then you kind of take that next leap. So as you were saying, the Good Food Initiative, even though technically not saying, it might not be labeled, KI might not be labeling it as a co-op, it's more kind of a social enterprise or so forth, but showing people how you've already been able to do that and do that successfully. Then when you look to build upon that, whatever that next step may be, then that gives people the confidence that, yeah, we can, jump to that next branch on the tree, that this isn't a leap off of a canyon.
agreed.
Ditto.
So I know I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to hop off. But again, thank you for sharing your time with me. I really do appreciate it. Grit, determination, vision connected to love. It's inevitable that we will win.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayes. Thank you so very much. We appreciate that extra 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
truly,
you. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes.
Bye-bye.
And thanks to everybody who showed up. That was a great conversation.
Man, it sure was.
Dang, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I was sitting here ready to cry.
Go ahead, man. Take the tape through, man. Go ahead.
You're the moderator.
Go ahead.
Oh man.
Knock me out now.
Yeah, that was good.
Actually leave the Zoom. Okay, just making sure.
And Dr. Hayes, I don't know if you're still listening, but if you ever want to get involved in something Kepra, then if he's not, we need to have him come talk on some more of that stuff. Those 3 pieces I think would be very good to have a conversation around.
Which pieces?
He spoke in the very beginning about how he's formulated theory, policy to practice. And the way he speaks to it, like he just lays it out so plain and clear. Because when he first said theory to policy to practice, I'm thinking the theory, and then you go get somebody to make a policy, and then this is how you do it. But he spoke about how it got formulated with this Dr. Lloyd that, of course, spoke up and never was able to get his PhD. And then he spoke to the policy formed out of Du Bois, Lloyd, and who was the other one, J-Rue? It was Lloyd, Du Bois.
And one thing he may not have mentioned at the time was that, that when Dr. Hogan, he mentioned that he went to University of Chicago. And University of Chicago is the bastion of neoliberal economics. Milton Friedman, the Friedman School, the Chicago Boys, who went to, to these the guys who were from South America, primarily like Chile, and went and studied under him. And they started spreading this neoliberal kind of capitalist ideology in a lot of other countries. And so I could see how it would be very difficult if when people talk about the Chicago school, they think about neoliberal economics. And, Milton Friedman is the one who basically said,
Yes.
Your responsibility as a corporation is to make as much profit as possible. Like this whole, I've got a responsibility to the community and I've got a responsibility to my workers. No, you have a responsibility to your shareholders and to make them rich. And that's what matters. And that has carried the day since he published that in 1970. So I can see how that would be difficult. But I was going to suggest that maybe one of the things that, that could, be helpful with the conversation within KI, because he said the baseline of all this, whether it's theory, practice, or so forth, is, is confidence and courage. And I think that, showing people at KI, and I don't even say the young people, older people, whatever it is, that in many forms, we're all, KI New Media, is a cooperative. People have cooperated, they pulled their resources, they're putting this together to show that this is something that not only KI can do, I know, that there's something that KI it can do and it is well positioned to do. I know, Joshua, because we're already doing it. And I think coming up with the I don't say, just even some blurbs about how KI, many of its social enterprises kind of fit that model, so it doesn't seem like a bridge too far.
I love the way you put it. It just is another reach on the tree and not a jump off of a canyon.
And I really think that's how you have to frame the conversation, because I think a lot of times a lot of these concepts can get kind of tossed out and they become kind of nebulous and they become untangible. But kind of breaking it down, giving easy examples, like you said, Deidre, you worked in like a little like childcare cooperative, it's like volunteerism and mutual actually I think there's a term used in the book, but just like mutual beneficence, like we're both going to get something out of this, or the community is going to get something out of this work. And I think that needs to be shown as value rather than money, in air quotes, being considered the valuable item, or how we deem things valuable or not valuable.
So those were co-ops. Those they didn't have those names, but they were.
But but just also the value in people's lives. Everybody needs, help with not everybody, but there's need for health and transportation and childcare and training and mental health. I mean, there's so many needs that the community has, and by coming together for this mutual benefit, because people already practicing it with their families, or with their close friends, and how do you provide structures where people can formalize that, get support for it, to then carry it through. So I think that might be an exercise, we can talk about this later, that KI can kind of help with, to show that this is something that KI is already doing. I gotta go. Joshua's calling me. So.
Yeah.